Hello and welcome. This is our first video for the When Boys Read Great Things Happen Facebook page. And I am happy to have with me today a former colleague of mine. We were both principals in Fort Wayne Community Schools here in Indiana together. And Carolyn and I have remained friends since that time. And I am finding out lots of things that I didn't even know about her. And one of those is that she has an immense interest in getting boys to read. And so first, Carolyn, I'll have you just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll just kind of see where this goes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shaffer, for having me this afternoon. I really appreciate this opportunity to promote literacy in any way I can. And I am, as you stated, I am a formal educator. I was with Fort Wayne Community Schools for many, many years, over 30 years. And my area of expertise is elementary. And I love children. I have a passion for reading. I love leadership. And I just look back on those years and just, I'm grateful to have the opportunity that I had to impact a lot of students, not only in reading, of course, in all the subject areas. So I continue to do that, even though I've been retired for 7 years now. I continue to go into the schools and work with teachers on the components of reading, and I read with kids, and I, talk about books. I tutor, I mentor, I do everything I possibly can so that we can continue to get children to love to read.
Absolutely. So tell me, Carolyn, for you personally, this started as a family thing. Tell me about that.
Yes, absolutely right. When my son was in 2nd or 3rd grade, he was reading above grade level, but he was not reading challenging literature. And he really wasn't interested in chapter books at that time, about the end of the 2nd grade. And that's usually when you want to introduce chapter books. I'm sure it's much earlier now. But for him, we wanted him to read chapter books because we knew that it was more content and more to talk about than just a picture book, that was, very, straightforward. So we tried to look at different authors, and we talked about different genres and everything. And then one day he came home with a book by R.L. Stine. And at that time, I don't think educators were pushing that type of stories, but I knew I wasn't. And my husband said to me, he said, it's not, inappropriate material. It's just material that can be discussed at dinner or whatever. And since it's interesting to him, we should entertain, him reading it and then us talking about it. So that's what really made a light bulb come on for me, is when he said, when I want to read, about what R.L. Stine writes about. And so that's my personal story of how I had to find what he had to find, what was interesting to him, in order for me to relate to the love and the appreciation of reading.
And I have to tell you, Carolyn, that's one of the strongest messages that Dr. Ruth Jefferson and I are putting in the book that we're going to have published, is that it really doesn't matter what boys read, but just that they are reading. Because we found out in talking with a lot of different people and doing a lot of research that almost any boy can be motivated to read. And I am thoroughly convinced of this, as long as we find out what's interesting to them. And if we allow them, I'm the kid that grew up reading the back of cereal boxes every morning. Now, cereal boxes are not that thrilling anymore, but they used to have stories, and all kinds of stuff to do. And so I understand, I get it. I understand that if we let boys read what they want to read, most of the time, it's not an ability issue. It's, we have laid such a great foundation in our kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade years in school that I am convinced that our boys know how to read. They just choose not to. And that goes along great with what you just said. I think when we, and one of my favorite writers on this particular topic is a guy by the name of Thomas Newkirk, who said that if we open our minds and allow boys to read things that we wouldn't necessarily consider highbrow learning, then we're going to open up a whole new world to them. And we may be surprised that eventually they're going to go into some other areas of deeper reading just because of developing that interest.
Exactly. And you make a very good point, because even when my son got in 4th grade, and that's usually when children learn the curriculum for their state, and he just became the historian of our household, because, you know, he knew everything about Indiana history, and we went on a family vacation after his 4th grade year, and everything just came to life for him. Whereas with my daughter, she and I would just get in the bed, and, you know, I have all these picture books from the Scholastic Book Fair every year. And, you know, she just grab reading, literacy,
Sure.
and he never struggled. And you make a very good point. Roderick was never a struggling reader, never, ever. It's just that we struggled with finding the right material for him. And once he identified it for himself, then, you know, it was just amazing. And then the Indiana history, you know, and even to this day, I went with my children on a vacation a couple of years ago, and we went to Washington, D.C. for the 2nd or 3rd time. And, you know, when we went to the African American Museum, I mean, we literally had to pull him through there, because he is such a historian. He loves to read every detail. He wants to know everything about every subject. And so I'm glad that we realize as parents that it's about high interest level. Whatever
That's
their
exactly
interest
right.
level is, that's why we have to dig and dig and dig and find that literature that it will align with what their interest is. Because if they're not interested in it, they're not going to make an attempt to even know what's in the book. And as you said, it's not about ability. It's about what is their interest.
That's exactly right. And I know that I found in working with boys that when I relaxed in my head the fact that they didn't have to be reading the classics, that it was okay to read comic books, or as we call them now, graphic novels.
Yes.
You know, when I realized that I was going to let go of what I wanted them to read in favor of what they wanted to read, that eventually they would do just like your son did and become and I think that's one of those things that is so important, is that we allow boys to read the things that are interesting to them. Now, you were an elementary principal for about how long?
17 years.
17 years. That's and I have to tell you, I think that's one of the best jobs on the face of the earth. I also was an elementary principal for a long time, and it was probably the most fun I've ever had doing anything.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, it's just a great job.
It is a great job. It's very challenging, but it's so rewarding. I mean, you know, when children learn, it's just excitement in the air. You know, it's just excitement in the building. You know, when you have an event that surrounds reading and children, you know, meeting their goals and setting benchmarks and everything. I mean, it's well worth the struggles. It's well worth the successes.
I know for me, one of the things that was interesting is we started in the last couple of years. I was at Lincoln Elementary here in Fort Wayne. And I'm going to also interview Sean Smiley, who was also a principal at the same time.
Yes.
And Sean had told me about a boys book club that he started. So I thought, well, I can do that. You know, I never thought about starting a boys book club, but I thought, I'm a guy, I can start a boys book club.
Right.
And so after I did that, the funny thing was, I had been a principal at this point in time for about 23 years already, a principal. You know, I've been a principal at all grade levels. And not once during that time had any boy ever walked up to me and said, "What are you reading?" Or "I can't wait to tell you what I'm reading."
Right.
But after that boys book club was started, every single day as I'm standing out at bus duty, because that was one of the things that I did at the end of the day, every day, as a lot of principals do. And I would have boys come up to me every single day saying, "Hey, Dr. Shaffer, you got to see what I'm reading." And I'm like, I don't know what just happened here, but this was the coolest thing to me. And then they would say, "Can I tell about it at the next book club?" And I said, "Absolutely, just bring the
Yeah.
book and come prepared to talk about it." And it was
Yes.
like somebody had flipped a switch that it was okay to read. And
Yes.
that was one of my best
And
memories.
I had an experience similar to that, but my experience, like you did the boys book club. For me, it was when teachers started the literature circles. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And then I would go into classrooms and I would talk to the children about, the literature circle that they were in. And then I would say, well, can you come to my office later and tell me a little bit more? I would always leave them hanging
Absolutely.
on so that they would want to come back and tell me more about what's happening in there, not only with the story itself, but within the dynamics of the literature circle. How are you guys thinking about that? And what did John say? And what did Sarah think? And when you get kids involved in reading like that, it becomes real to them. So
Well, it
the
becomes
Boys
even
Book
social.
Club.
I think that's the great thing about what you just described, is that reading becomes more than just a private, personal thing, but it
Exactly.
becomes a social event where they get together and they talk about it. And that's one of the things that I found out in boys reading, is that when boys, for whatever reason, we're always, I mean, even as adults, we're still boys. We're all excited about joining things. I don't know why, but we like to join. We like to be a member of this thing, whatever this thing is. So when we make reading a social event,
Yes.
or something to which boys can belong, then bingo, right there, you got something.
Got it.
And that was one of the cool things that we did with the reading thing, is that it was always based around books. Like I would bring in every week, every 2 weeks, I did this with 4th and 5th graders. They would skip their recess and come and hang out with me and talk about books. Now that was fun.
Wow. That was a huge accomplishment.
Well, I had 100 boys, literally 100 boys from 4th and 5th grade that would come and hang out with me and talk about books. And so the focus of it was that it was talking about the books. And so
Yes.
I taught them how to do book talks. I said, the number one rule of book club is that you have to bring a book with you. So they did. They every single time they brought a book. And I said, you don't even have to finish the book yet. Just be reading it. And what you're going to do is you're going to hold the book up and you're going to tell us who wrote the book and who illustrated it, and tell what does this book mean to you? Well, every boy could do that. And
exactly.
They would stay. I had boys that had never talked in front of a group ever before that would stand up and talk about their book. And everybody else got quiet when these boys were talking. So that was one of the.
But Dr. Shaffer, you do realize that one of the reasons why they were willing to do that is because they were not being assessed.
Exactly.
They were
I
not
love
being
that thought.
assessed. They weren't in an environment where, well, if I don't know how to pronounce this word, or if I can't summarize this paragraph, someone is going to judge me. And that happens a lot to not only boys, of course, but to girls as well. And that's one of the tools in my toolbox that I share with parents today, is that when you introduce a book to a child, like this book, like I might say, like my book, Mason Goes to School, just don't hop into the literature right away. And I'll say with the younger children, I say, just say, hey, let's do a picture walk. And that takes away that anxiety for that child
Okay, Carolyn, you were talking about doing book talks. Tell me a little
Yes.
a picture walk through the book.
Right. I have, it has been my experience with parents and grandparents of younger children that have had children that were not necessarily expressing an interest in reading, because their approach would be, well, let's read this book. Well, immediately they don't know what the expectation is other than they have to know every word in the book. And so, you know, an example, when I introduce Basin Goes to School with some of my parents and grandparents to read to their child or grandchild, I would say, don't get into the literature first, just do a picture walk. Talk about the pictures, talk about what experiences they have had that
Sure.
relates to the book. And then that lowers the temperature in the room, in the environment. And now the child knows, oh, well, we're just going to relax and enjoy the story. Not necessarily, when you take that element
Talk
away,
to me
it
a little
helps.
bit more about experiencing the book, because I think that's really important.
Well, when you experience a book, then you give a child to talk about the characters. You give a child an opportunity to make connections. You know, have you ever experienced, you know, this at school, or do you know someone that have experienced this? And until we make it real, you know, or if it's just a fictitious book, and then you can say, well, how would you have this book end
Sure.
since it's not true? You know, if it were true, what would you do in this instance? And that makes it an experience rather than just picking up the book and
That's
flipping
right.
through.
And it makes a connection to their life.
Exactly.
Now, I do want you held up a book there a minute ago, and I would
Okay.
like for you to show us that book again and tell it, how did this book come to be?
This book came to be, I had expressed to my family that one day I wanted to write a children's book. And they have heard this all of my 36 educational career. And so after I retired, I think I had been retired for 2 years. And my daughter, she said, Mom, what about that book you said you were going to write? And I thought, oh, I don't know. And, you know, and so I contacted a local author just to sit with him. I spent a half a day with him. His name is James Shaw. I know he won't mind me putting his name out there because
Sure.
he's a great author, local. And I spent the afternoon with this gentleman. And when I left there, I was so excited and so just, I knew this is what I had to do. You know, you have these goals, you have these things you want to do in life. I don't necessarily call it a bucket list. I just call it things I want to do while I'm living. Okay. And I wrote the book, and then I didn't know the process until he walked me through it. So then I needed an illustrator. Then I needed to have it edited. Then I needed to have it published, kind of like what I've been teaching the children all my life. When you
Sure.
write in school, you have to eventually publish, and then you have to share it with the class, right? And so that's how the book came about. It was through my daughter. She inspired me. Alexis is her name. And then once I got the book written, I contacted James Shaw again. And then he walked me through, how do you get an illustrator? And then once you get an illustrator, then you have to, you know, get an editor. And then once you get that, now you got to promote the book. And I had so much fun promoting the book, because all I did was got on the phone. I called Allen County Public Library, Boys and Girls Club. I mean, I was going everywhere,
Oh, that's terrific.
you know, just to share one book. And, you know, once I got that book in my hand in front of children, then it opened up a whole new world for some of them. And for others, it just was like, well, you know, you're an author, you know, and then they want to know about you. And then you ask them about themselves. And then you say, well, what will you write about? Why don't you start a list of things that
Sure.
you might want to write about? So you just encourage children to do that.
So what's your next book then?
Well, actually, the second book that I wrote is called Gather and Play. And it is actually based on a true story. Well, this one is too, but it's fictitious, okay? Dogs don't talk.
Well, sometimes
one.
I think mine do. In
That
fact,
would be questionable.
I'm sure that in this video, I have not been successful in getting them cut out when they choose to bark at the UPS guy or whatever. So at any rate.
So this is my second book, and this book took me a whole year. It took me a year to write this book. It took me about 6 months to write this book. And actually, I'm pretty satisfied with writing children's book. I'd rather go to a book fair and read somebody else's work. While it's very rewarding, it can be very time consuming. It can be very, costly. And that's not my passion. My passion is just being in the school,
Sure,
and reading and celebrating reading and seeing children when the light comes on, when they realize that, they're actually enjoying a book, so.
and I think that's the whole thing that we're trying to accomplish is I've heard Alan Boyko, who's recently retired as the president of Scholastic Book Fairs. Alan used to always tell us, we have a goal here, and that is to create a culture of reading in
Yes.
schools. And that's exactly what you just described. That culture of reading where, and I'm going to go back to something you said probably 5 minutes ago, where you said, boys like to read when they know they're not going to be tested on the book.
Yes, when they're
And
not
you're
going
both
to be assessed. Yeah.
principals during the No Child Left Behind era, and
Yes.
all the terrible things that we had to do because we had to be graded as a school. And so in order for us to be graded, our kids had to do certain level on their tests and all that kind of stuff. Well, one of the things that I think is so wonderful about creating a real culture of reading in a school is that it has nothing in the world to do with what they're going to get tested on.
Yes.
Because if we want boys or girls to love reading, we have to give them the chance to read, just like what you said, when they are not going to be tested on it. And I think that, I wish I could remember who the author was. Somebody who wrote an article on reading said that we've spent so much of our time teaching kids stoplight reading. And by that, she meant, we let them read a sentence, then we say, stop and tell me what you read. Or you get to the end of the page, now tell me what you just read. And instead of stoplight reading, we need to just let them go. Let
Yes.
them read. And then they start to pick up the feel of that book and what it means. And sometimes they'll shock us. I mean, just by the fact that they have such interest. And I think that if that were one thing that I would love to see accomplished, is that we could get past this ridiculous testing phase that we are in and say the tests don't matter. What matters is that kids like to read. And
Lifelong readers is
that's
what.
it. See, that's the thing.
Lifelong readers.
I think, boy, if we can get to that point where we recognize, and I feel sorry for superintendents, because every year when the test results come back, superintendents end up standing in front of a news camera somewhere saying, we don't believe these test results represent the hard work that our teachers are doing, that our principals are doing, the effort that our students are putting into it, because we don't think these tests represent them. Well, guess what? They're right. They are right. These tests don't represent, you can't in 2 or 3 days cram the whole year and evaluate the whole year and think that it makes any sense. When what you were talking about is how you make sense of it. When you see kids pick up a book, or like your son in the museum, reading every single thing that was there, and you were like, okay, can we skim some of this? Let's move on down because there's something I want to see down. No, we're going to read every bit of it. But that's when you know you've won the battle. And I think that's so important. So Carolyn, one more time, hold both of those books up because I want everybody that sees these to see these books written by Carolyn Sleet, Based Goes to School, and Gather and Play. And if somebody's interested in picking up these books, where could they get them from?
They are available on Amazon.com.
There you go. That's outstanding. That makes it very easy, doesn't it? And Carolyn, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. And we will get back in touch with you when the book actually gets published and make sure that you get a copy of it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shaffer. It's been a joy to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you too.